I was flying to save a life, but before the plane even left the ground, the captain tried to throw me off. The hum of the airport terminal is usually a sound I associate with excitement, with the promise of a new city, or the comfort of returning home. But that day, it was a drumbeat of anxiety. Every announcement, every rolling suitcase, every distant laugh just tightened the knot in my stomach. I wasn't flying for a vacation or a business conference. I was flying to save a life. A 7-year-old girl named Lily was waiting for me in a hospital 3 states away. She had a congenital heart defect so rare, so complex that only a handful of surgeons in the world would even attempt the procedure. I was one of them. Her file, a thick manila folder filled with scans and reports, felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my carry-on. Her life was literally in my hands, and the first step was getting on this plane. That's why I'd booked a first-class ticket. It wasn't about the luxury. It was about necessity. I needed the space to review my notes one last time, the quiet to mentally walk through the 12-hour surgery ahead, and the guarantee that I would arrive, rested and sharp. The quiet lounge, the priority boarding, these weren't just perks. They were tools for my real job. As I walked down the jet bridge, I gave a polite nod to the flight attendants and the man standing just outside the cockpit door. He was the captain, broad-shouldered with sandy gray hair and a jaw that looked like it was permanently clenched. His uniform was crisp, his posture ramrod straight. He was greeting passengers with a practiced politician's smile. He'd just shared a hearty laugh with the elderly white couple in front of me, wishing them a pleasant flight. When I stepped forward, his smile didn't just fade, it was forcefully erased. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, flicked over my dark skin, my tailored but casual travel clothes, and then to the first-class boarding pass in my hand. He didn't say a word. He just stared, a flicker of something ugly and suspicious in his gaze. I'd felt that look 1,000 times in my life. The silent question, "Do you belong here?" I ignored it, like I always do. I had more important things to focus on. I found my seat, 2A, stowed my bag, and pulled out Lily's file. The world outside my little bubble of concentration disappeared. For the next 20 minutes I was lost in the intricate roadmap of a tiny, broken heart. "Sir." The voice was sharp, cutting through my focus. I looked up. It was the captain. He was standing in the aisle, his arms crossed, blocking the way. The last of the economy passengers were still shuffling past him. "Yes?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I need to see your boarding pass," he said. It wasn't a request. I blinked, confused. "They just scanned it at the gate." "I need to see it," he repeated, his voice louder this time, drawing the attention of the passengers around me. A woman in 3B peeked over her magazine. Sighing, I reached into my jacket pocket and handed him the pass. He didn't just take it, he snatched it. He held it up to the light as if it were a counterfeit bill, his eyes scrutinizing every letter. "C2A, he muttered, then looked at me, a sneer playing on his lips. "This can't be right." My blood started to simmer. "I can assure you it is. Is there a problem, Captain?" "There's a problem," he said, loud enough for half the cabin to hear, "when people try to sneak into seats they haven't paid for. It compromises the integrity of my flight." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. He was accusing me, in front of everyone, of being a fraud. My jaw tightened. "I paid for this seat with my own money. If you have a problem, take it up with the gate agent, but I suggest you do it quietly." He laughed, a short, barking sound. "Oh, I'll take it up, all right." He looked down at my boarding pass, then back at me, his eyes filled with a smug sense of power. "In fact, I'll solve this problem right now." And then, with a deliberate theatrical motion, he ripped my boarding pass in half. The sound of the tearing paper cut through the air, sharp and violent. A collective gasp rippled through the first-class cabin. He dropped the 2 useless pieces onto my lap. "This ticket is invalid," he declared, his voice booming with authority. "Now get off my plane." My mind went blank with shock and fury. I stared at the torn paper, then up at his smug face. The flight attendant behind him looked horrified, but was clearly too intimidated to speak. All I could think about was Lily, her small, hopeful face. The clock was ticking. "You can't do this," I said, my voice dangerously low. "I have to be on this flight. It's a medical emergency." The captain just scoffed. "A medical emergency, right. I've heard that one before. Off, now." He gestured towards the open door of the plane. The ground crew was preparing to close it. This was it. My last chance. I stood up, my fists clenched, ready to argue, to plead, to do whatever it took. But before I could say another word, a frantic voice cut through the cabin from the back of the plane. It was one of the flight attendants, her voice shrill with panic. "Captain, stop! A passenger collapsed. He's not breathing. Oh my God, is there a doctor on this flight?" Every instinct, every ounce of my training snapped into place. The red haze of my anger vanished, replaced by the cold, sharp clarity of a medical crisis. The pilot, the torn ticket, my own humiliation, none of it mattered anymore. There was a life in the balance. Without a second thought, I pushed past the captain. He put an arm out to stop me. "Hey, I told you to get out of my way," I commanded. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried the absolute, non-negotiable authority of an operating theater. It was a tone that made residents and nurses jump. It made the captain, for the first time, falter. His arm dropped. I was at the back of the plane in seconds. Passengers were crowded around, a panicked circle of helplessness. On the floor of the galley lay an elderly man, his face a ghastly shade of gray, his chest still. A flight attendant was frantically trying to get a response, her hands fluttering uselessly over him. "I'm a doctor," I announced, my voice cutting through the chaos. "Everyone, please, back up. Give him some air." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. I dropped to my knees beside the man, my fingers immediately going to his neck, searching for a carotid pulse. Nothing. His airway was clear. His skin was clammy. "He just collapsed," the flight attendant stammered, her eyes wide with fear. "No pulse," I said, already starting compressions. I positioned my hands on his sternum and began the rhythmic push. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. My mind was a steel trap of procedures and protocols. "Get me your onboard medical kit and the AED, now. Does anyone know this man's medical history?" A woman sobbed from a nearby seat. "He's my husband. He has a heart condition. He has nitroglycerin in his bag." "You," I said, pointing to another flight attendant who had just arrived, "help his wife find the nitro. You," I looked back at the first one, "AED, go." They scattered, spurred into action by my commands. The captain had followed me to the back of the plane, and he stood there, just outside the galley, his face a thunderous mask of confusion and disbelief. He watched as I continued compressions, my movements efficient and powerful, my breathing controlled. This was my world. This was where I was the authority. The flight attendant returned with the AED. I ripped open the man's shirt as she opened the case. "Pads on the chest," I ordered, not missing a beat in my compressions, while she fumbled with the sticky electrodes. "Upper right, lower left." She placed them. "Clear," I shouted, pulling my hands back. The machine whirred, its robotic voice analyzing. "Shock advised." "Everybody clear," I yelled again, making sure no one was touching him. I hit the orange button. The man's body arched off the floor with a violent jolt, then fell back. I immediately resumed compressions. This was the dance of life and death, and I knew every single step. For 2 agonizing minutes, the only sounds were my counting, the desperate sobs of the man's wife, and the hum of the cabin. Then, under my hands, I felt it. A flutter. I stopped, my fingers flying back to his neck. A pulse. Weak. Thready. But it was there. The man took a ragged, gasping breath. Color began to seep back into his face. A wave of relief washed through the cabin. The wife was crying, but this time with gratitude. I sat back on my heels, sweat beading on my forehead, my own heart hammering against my ribs. It was then that the senior flight attendant, a woman with silver hair pinned in a neat bun and a name tag that read Susan, pushed past the stunned captain. She knelt beside me, her expression a mixture of awe and something else, a cold, simmering fury. She looked from the now breathing passenger to me, and then she stood up and turned to face the pilot. Her voice was quiet, but it sliced through the aftermath like a shard of ice. "Captain Miller," she said, her tone dripping with condemnation, "while you were busy harassing our first-class passengers, this man almost died." The captain's face flushed a deep, mottled red. "I was maintaining protocol." He started to bluster, but she cut him off. "Were you? Or were you making assumptions?" She took a small step closer to him, lowering her voice so only he and I could hear. "Before we took off, I reviewed the special passenger manifest. Did you?" He looked confused. "The what?" Susan didn't blink. "The memo from corporate, about the priority passenger in seat 2A, the one whose travel was personally arranged and paid for by our CEO." Her eyes flicked to me and then back to the captain. The final pieces clicked into place with horrifying precision. "That man you just tried to throw off this plane," she said, her words slow and deliberate, each one a hammer blow, "is Dr. Aaron Evans. He's the pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon from Johns Hopkins. He's on this flight for a critical care transport. He's here to operate on the 7-year-old girl, Lily, the one our airline is sponsoring the life-saving surgery for." The captain's face went from red to a pasty, blood-drained white. The air in the galley grew thick and silent, a vacuum where his arrogance used to be. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, the washed-out blue of his eyes now wide with a dawning horror. I wasn't just some guy he could push around. I was the linchpin of a massive, high-profile corporate charity initiative. I was the man his own CEO had personally arranged to fly. The torn pieces of my boarding pass, still lying on seat 2A, suddenly represented the shredded remnants of his career. I got to my feet, my legs a little shaky from the adrenaline. The revived passenger was being tended to by his wife and the flight attendants, a murmur of quiet concern replacing the earlier panic. I looked directly at Captain Miller. The smug, powerful man from 10 minutes ago was gone, replaced by a hollow shell. "Captain," I said, my voice steady and cold, "this passenger needs to be taken to a hospital as soon as we land. You need to radio ahead and have an ambulance waiting at the gate." It wasn't a suggestion, it was an order. He just nodded, unable to form words. He looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. Susan, the senior flight attendant, stepped forward again. "Dr. Evans," she said, her voice respectful, "please, let us get you back to your seat. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water would be great. Thank you, Susan," I replied, giving her a grateful nod. As I walked back up the aisle toward first class, the atmosphere had completely changed. The passengers who had watched my humiliation now looked at me with a mixture of shame and awe. A few murmured, "Thank you," and that was amazing as I passed. They had witnessed the entire ugly drama, from the racist accusation to the life-saving intervention. They knew exactly what had happened. When I reached my seat, the 2 pieces of my boarding pass were still there. I picked them up and sat down, holding them in my hand. Captain Miller followed me a moment later, his posture stooped, all the ramrod straightness gone. He stood in the aisle looking down at me, a man utterly defeated. Dr. Evans, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I don't know what to say. I am so sorry. I made an assumption. A terrible, unforgivable assumption. I looked from the torn paper in my hand up to his face. There was no satisfaction in seeing him grovel. There was just a deep, weary sadness. Your assumption, I said, keeping my voice low, nearly cost that man his life. And if you had succeeded in throwing me off this plane, it would have cost a 7-year-old girl hers. The weight of my words seemed to physically crush him. I know, he choked out. There's no excuse. I will report myself to the company. I'll accept whatever consequences. The consequences are irrelevant to me, I said, cutting him off. What matters is that you understand why you did what you did. You saw a black man in first class, and your brain immediately jumped to the conclusion that he didn't belong. You didn't see a passenger, you saw a threat. You didn't see a person, you saw a stereotype. That's the disease, Captain, and it's far more dangerous than any heart condition. I placed the 2 halves of my boarding pass on the empty seat beside me. Now, if you'll excuse me, I said, turning away from him and opening Lily's file, I have a child's life to prepare for. I suggest you go and prepare to fly this plane. He stood there for a long moment, then turned and walked silently back to the cockpit. He didn't speak to another passenger for the rest of the flight. The journey continued in a tense, surreal quiet. When we landed, an ambulance was waiting, as I had instructed. The elderly passenger, now stable, gave me a weak but grateful thumbs up as he was wheeled away. I was the last person to deplane. As I stepped onto the jet bridge, a woman in a sharp corporate suit was waiting for me. She introduced herself as the airline's chief of staff. Captain Miller was standing beside her, his hat in his hands, his eyes fixed on the floor. Dr. Evans, the woman said, her tone deeply apologetic. On behalf of the entire airline and our CEO personally, I want to offer our most profound apologies for the captain's reprehensible behavior. It will be dealt with the utmost severity. He has been suspended, pending a full investigation and termination. I just nodded, too tired to rehash it all. All I could think about was the hospital, about Lily. We have a car waiting to take you directly to the hospital, she continued. Anything you need, it's yours. I started to walk past them, but then I stopped and looked back at Miller one last time. He finally raised his head, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was almost painful to see. For the first time, he saw me. Not a stereotype, not a threat, but a man, a doctor, a person who belonged. And in that moment of shattered pride and gut-wrenching realization, I knew that whatever the airline decided, his real punishment had already begun. He would have to live with who he had revealed himself to be for the rest of his life. And with that thought, I turned and walked toward the waiting car, leaving him and the wreckage of his prejudice behind me. Lily was waiting.